Hello, my name is Jim Blackburn, and this is the first hour of what promises to be a 3-hour program online that is a duplicate of the live program that I'm doing now that's been approved by the State Bar. It's entitled Resilience, the Phoenix in All of Us. I did a program some years ago entitled Resilience, but this is a new and different one. Let me tell you the ground rules first for how this will work to make it interactive with the State Bar. The hour is essentially an ethics hour, and the truth of the matter is all the programs that I do are ethics hours. But the State Bar has no requirement that you have general hours, just ethics. So once an attorney has the 2 hours of ethics that he or she needs, then the balance are counted fully towards their CLE requirements. Insofar as paralegals are concerned, once you have the 1 hour of ethics that you need, then the balance of 5 hours or 2 hours in this 3-hour program are counted fully towards your recertification. So that is not a problem. I will send to you a certificate by email, both to attorneys and paralegals. For attorneys, I will also turn your time into the State Bar. But the Bar has a requirement that these programs be interactive. And so at some point during the course of the programs, I don't know even right now when, I will ask you a question and ask you to answer the question. The answer is not so terribly important, and the question is basically pretty simple. It is just that if you answer it, then I know that you have seen the program. That's all the Bar wants. The Bar wants somehow to know that you've actually watched the program. So if you will let me know that you've done that and answered the question that I asked, then that's all the proof we need. And that's sort of a poor man's way of making this seminar interactive with the State Bar. That keeps you from having to push a button and turn something off and on your computer. I chose the title, The Phoenix in All of Us, because a friend of mine in Greensboro, who is a lawyer, suggested that I do so. And if you go back to when you were in high school perhaps and studying Greek mythology, you perhaps studied about the great beautiful bird Phoenix, who dies after living a long life. And out of the ashes of having died, he is or she is reborn, more beautiful a bird than ever before. And that's what I think is true of everyone, period. Lawyer, paralegal, or any individual. You know, no matter what happens in your life, you can start over. No matter what happens, you can start over. One of my great sayings, I don't know if any of you all remember, but in the 1950s, there was a television show. It was a comedy called Burns and Allen. It was Gracie Allen and George Burns. And believe it or not, George Burns was the straight person. Gracie was sort of the ditz. She was his wife. And so it went on very well until Gracie got sick one day and passed away at a very early age. After her death, George is in their home and walks into the study and finds a note in an envelope on the desk. He opens it, and it's a handwritten note from Gracie, his wife, who says to him, "George, do not put a period where God has only placed a comma. Do not put a period where God has only placed a comma." Remember that. You can absolutely start over. And so George Burns, as you may recall, reinvented himself as an actor and a one-person straight comedy person, drinking whiskey and smoking cigars and chasing women and telling jokes. He even played God in a couple of movies. So he totally became someone other than who he had been when Gracie was alive and was successful to the end of his life. I want to give you some specific examples of people whom I have known who have had to do this very same thing. If this were a live program and you were sitting in front of me, I would ask you, and you would probably give me an answer, as to where you were in November of 1980. Unfortunately, many of the people I asked say they were either in elementary school or perhaps even had not yet been born. But I was very much here. And on a late Tuesday night in November, probably the first Tuesday in November, I was at a hotel in Raleigh on an elevator. It was about 11 or 12 o'clock, and there were a bunch of lawyers in the elevator, and the hangers-on for Robert Morgan's senatorial campaign. He was running for re-election, and CBS News had just called the 30 minutes before his re-election to the United States Senate, having initially been elected in 1974. By morning, it had all been reversed, and the calling by CBS was withdrawn, and Senator Morgan was defeated narrowly for re-election. About 2 weeks after that, Robert, as I will call him, had an operation for brain surgery, which went on multiple hours. And as a result, the surgery turned out to be successful. The tumor in the right side of his face was benign, and he was able to live. However, it made him look old immediately. It changed the way he looked. His mouth was twisted to one side, and it would take years of therapy and working and exercising with his mouth to make it straight again. And so here was a person within 30 days, 2 weeks really, of losing his career. He had never lost an election up to that point, losing his political career, and almost his life, and having to start all over again. And yet he does. He starts totally all over again and becomes a practicing attorney. He even becomes director of the State Bureau of Investigation for a few years, a job that he once was over when he was State Attorney General. And on the day of his memorial service in Lillington, North Carolina, in the summer of 2016, Gerald Arnold, who is the former Chief Judge of the North Carolina Court of Appeals, eulogized him and said, "It's very rare that a person from Harnett County has, on the day of his service, obituaries written in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. That's not bad for someone who lost an election in 1980, 37 years before." And so that is a great example of someone rising from the absolute total ashes of the destruction of his career. And then there's another lady from Harnett County, Carolyn Stone, who's a former paralegal with the law firm of Pope and Tart. Carolyn and I have known each other for a long time. She is a paralegal who has been to my seminars so many times, such a loyal person. And one day she was telling me that in December of 1993, really the day after Christmas, and I had just finished telling her what happened to me in early December of 1993 when I was sentenced by the Superior Court to a short time in prison, and I was feeling sorry for myself. She said, "Well, Jim, after lunch, let me tell you a story." So she does. Her story is this. She and her husband were sitting in the living room by the Christmas tree, and their daughter, Tara, long blonde hair, a volleyball player, probably a sophomore, junior in high school, came into the living room and told them she'd be back in about an hour. She was going riding with some friends, and they said, "Great." And she left. Tara never came home. She was sitting in the back seat of a car driven by another young person, student at the same high school. He was driving too fast, drove off the road, flipped the car, and Tara was grievously hurt. She was not killed, but she was damaged beyond repair. And so she has spent the rest of her life, after spending multiple times in hospitals and surgeries, in a nursing home in Lillington. And every morning and every night up until including today, Carolyn and her husband exchange terms or times going to the nursing home and brushing her hair and brushing her teeth. And they have equipped a vehicle by which at least once or twice a month they take her to church. Now, the remarkable thing about this story is this. Carolyn is not bitter. She and her husband did not sue anyone. And they would tell you that they believe that her daughter's life is a very real blessing because of the fact that other people who have gone to the nursing home and have been there have seen her, gone by her room and visited with her, and it's been something that has made them feel good, because you see Tara smiles if you touch her toes. I know, I've done that. Now, she's not really aware that what you're doing is just sort of a reflex, and so she's not necessarily smiling because she's happy. But it makes the people who see her feel good. And then there's a great friend of mine in Asheville with the law firm of Van Winkle, Nancy Fowler, who years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, found that she had a lump in one of her breasts, and it was cancerous. Nancy had been a long-time litigation paralegal and told the doctor when she went to see him the following Monday or Tuesday, she had to wait over the weekend to go to the doctor. She asked him 2 questions. And the first question was, is this survivable? And the second question she asked was, what doors do I have to walk to go through to make this survivable? And I think that's a great picture if you can think about it. What doors do I have to walk through to make this survivable? Those are 3 stories. I'm sure there are many others. You may have one of someone who has had to be resilient, who has had to start over, who has had to find the phoenix in themselves. And I'm telling you, it can be done. Another lawyer, friend of mine who's been to a number of my programs, suggested that I ask you this question. Do you know where the Nobel Prizes originated? Do you know where they come from? So that you don't feel too bad. Many people do not know, though some do. The Nobel Prizes are the result of a bequest of money, or a grant of money, a lot of money, in the 19th century from Alfred Nobel, who was an inventor in Sweden or Switzerland, a Scandinavian country. He had 55 patents when he passed away. He was the inventor of dynamite. One day, Alfred Nobel was looking through the local newspaper and read with horror his obituary. You see, his brother had died, and the newspaper had gotten it confused and thought it was Alfred Nobel. And so they wrote about him. And what they said about him horrified him, because they wrote that he was probably the person most responsible for the destruction of more lives in a single moment than anyone else in human history by the invention of dynamite. And Alfred Nobel realized for the first and last time this is how he was going to be remembered. And so as a result, he changed completely and gave most all of his money away to create the prizes that we now know today as the Nobel Prizes in peace, in literature, the arts, in writing, any number of things. That's where it all came from. An accident, really. Realizing all of a sudden how he was going to be thought of and remembered. And so I ask you today to give it some thought, to think as you're watching this, how would you like to be remembered? And how do you think you would be remembered? Not necessarily at your death, but when you retire or when you change jobs, or how would you be remembered right now? One of the smartest things you can do, a friend of mine who's a lawyer in Wilmington suggested, is to write a note to yourself about every 5 years. A very frank and candid note, and just ask yourself how you are doing. What do people think of you? What do you think of yourself? Take a temperature of how you're doing every 5 years and see what progress, if any, you have made, or whether you've slid back, and what can you do about that. Remember always that if you want to go to a different place and do something differently, you first must be willing to do things you have never done before. I have a personal recollection of the idea or the concept of how you would be remembered. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was driving my car to Starbucks one morning, about 8 o'clock, over at North Hills in Raleigh. and my cell telephone rang. It was a friend of mine who's a lawyer who said, JB, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm okay. Wade, what's up? Well, I just wanted to know if you would answer the phone. And I said, well, why would I not answer the phone? He said, well, Jim, you don't know this, but it just came over the news that Jim Blackburn, who's an attorney in Raleigh, has just passed away. He just died. And I wanted to know if it were you. So, I said, no, it wasn't me. So I get my coffee, I drive back home, and my next door neighbor walks out the front steps, and she says, Jim, we just had Channel 5 over here, the local television station. Wanted to know if an ambulance had been here last night and where you were. And I told him I thought you'd just gone to Starbucks. And I said, well, that's true. And so my great good law firm friend of Ward and Smith in New Bern posted on their website for 24 hours that I had died. A friend of mine who's a lawyer in New Bern, who'd been to one of my seminars, wrote them a letter which was posted on the website talking about me and what it was like. A friend of mine in Raleigh sent that email to me, and I read what somebody wrote about me, honestly believing that I was no longer here. Fortunately, it was nice. But it does grab you to think and figure out what people might say about you if you're no longer here. So I ask you to do this, to think about how you would like to be remembered and how resilient you can be in starting over. You can start over in your own life. You can start over in your own law practice. You can start over as a paralegal. No matter what day of the week it is, you can start over. No matter how lousy or bad you did the day before, or how much you didn't get anything done, you can start over. Don't put a period where God has only placed a comma, and don't you put periods in your own career. Several years ago, a friend of mine, a minister in Raleigh, asked me to speak at a morning church service where they have sort of the informal service, and the band plays and this sort of stuff. And so I was to talk for about 10 minutes to people. And so I did. And she had sent me a book to read. It was written by a priest, and the title of it's called Falling Upward. And the Cliff Notes version of this book, Falling Upwards, is this. The writer believes that in every person's life there are two halves of life. They don't necessarily take place chronologically equally in half, because of course you don't know where that will be. But at some point in your life, a crisis happens. It doesn't have to be a legal crisis. It can be a crisis of any kind. It can be a death, it can be a divorce, it can be a separation, it can be a loss of a job. It can be a legal crisis. You can be sued, you can get into legal trouble criminally, any number of things. And the first half of our lives are often spent in pursuit of ourselves, making money, getting a new job, being constructive that way. And then the crisis happens and it changes us. It makes us more outward. It makes us more selfless. It makes us more interested in doing things for other people. And it actually increases the value of our lives. She wanted me to read this book because she wanted me to talk about this at her church service. So I did, and I spoke. It's the first time I've ever followed a band to speak at any time on anything. So I'm sitting on a stool in front of about 200 people whom I do not know. And I talked with them, and I said to them, I wish that I had not gotten into legal trouble many years ago, and I wish that I had remained a lawyer, because if I had, I would have probably made more money, and secondly, maybe people wouldn't have said non-nice things about me from time to time. But I didn't. And if I had remained a lawyer, that might have been well and good. But it is also entirely possible that I might have missed the main and important purpose of my life, which is to do what I do now. So, what is the purpose of your life? What is the purpose of your career? and give that some good and serious thought. Now, I have to tell you, it's hard to start over. People will say, well, you could just have new beginnings. It's a nice phrase. Or you can just turn the page. Well, that's all true, but it is very difficult to start over. You know, years ago, when I wrote my first manuscript of my book, I thought it was great. I just thought it was great. I thought I was going to get a Pulitzer Prize or something like that. You know, I gave it to some friends. They all read it. They all thought it was terrible. Nobody liked it at all. So I put the manuscript away for several years and finally went back to it and figured out that one of the reasons that it did not succeed the first time in my first draft was that it was still perhaps a little snarky. I had not yet come to grips with all that had taken place in my life and whose fault it completely was. And so one of the things I learned to do was to change that. And so when I wrote the manuscript of my book, Flame Out, which is in fact the real story of what happened, I made sure I took full responsibility myself and did not shift any blame on anybody else. I think that's important. I think one of the key things to starting over is you have to come to terms with what has taken place. If I had a bottle of some pills and we marketed these pills really well, you could buy them over the counter, they're approved by the Food and Drug Administration, they're perfectly safe, they're not terribly expensive, but they would make you better at what you do and improve your chances of starting over and being resilient. The question is, would you take or buy these pills? I think that you might. There are such pills. There is a pill. It doesn't happen magically. Nothing happens magically on starting over. But if you take this pill, which is some steps that I'm going to suggest to you to follow, I think that you have a great chance of being resilient and a great chance of starting over and a great chance of being Phoenix. Let me just throw out a few of these suggestions at first. They're not in any particular order. They're not the Sermon on the Mount. They're not the Ten Commandments. You could have your own list. You could have a blank sheet of paper right now and write down your own list of things that you think would make you better at what you do. If you were here in front of me, I would probably ask you to give me one suggestion as to what something you could change in your own life that would make you better at what you do than what you are now. I did this in Newbern not too long ago, and one lawyer said he wished he listened better. He had trouble listening. He was a young lawyer. He said he talks over his clients too much because he's trying to let them know he's very smart and very learned in the law and has answers. He says, that's not good. I wished I listened better. Another lawyer said, I need to be more selfish. I need to take care of my own self better. Another lawyer said, I need to go to lunch with some friends that I've known for a long time in my life and who are not lawyers. I need to get away and to escape the practice of law for a while. There are any number of things that people can do. But let me give you some specific suggestions, and then we'll come back perhaps and talk about each one in this hour and perhaps the next hour as well. The first one is to show up and be on time. Show up and be on time. I always say this in front of my seminars. I always hurt someone's feelings because invariably someone's 20 minutes late. They think I'm speaking to them. I'm not really. But showing up and being on time is so important. The second one is to own your mistakes. This sounds really pretty. Sounds very simple. Sounds easy. Let me assure you, it is not pretty easy. It's tough to own your mistakes. Next, I think you have to not live in the past. Not live in the rearview mirror. Everybody has regrets. Everybody wants a do-over on everything. But that's difficult, if not impossible, to do. And all you can do is live right now or in the future. You cannot undo what happened even before we started the filming this program today. You need to learn to be persistent. You need to keep trying. You need not to quit. You need not to give up. You need to be persistent. You need to learn humility. Not everybody agrees with me on this. I've had some lawyers say, humility is for losers. Humbleness is not what clients want. They want somebody to take charge. Well, they want somebody who's competent, of course, and somebody who's prepared, and somebody who's smart and intelligent, and a good lawyer or paralegal. But they also want somebody, I think, with some humility. If you don't believe this, you go try a lawsuit. You go try a case in front of a judge or a jury and be arrogant and cocky.